Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city hidden underground in Mexico, which may give a better understanding of the Maya civilization.
We have been told the Maya civilization simply collapsed and vanished into the jungle. But that is a lie. Deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, researchers just cracked open a sealed chamber that was never meant to be found.
We have found a new set of tools. We get an insight into something that we've never imagined possible in the Amazon.
Inside, they discovered remains that predate the Maya by thousands of years, and the DNA results are terrifying scientists. This isn't just about a lost tribe. It is about a genetic code hidden inside us, waiting for a signal. The official story of human history is about to break, and the truth is far stranger than any fiction. The impossible geometry of El Mirador. It all started in the Petén Basin of northern Guatemala. This place is dense, dangerous, and one of the least explored parts of the entire Mayan world. You have to understand, the jungle here is so thick it swallows light. A research team was out there working on a standard restoration program. Their job was just to scan the foundations of collapsed temples near the massive city of El Mirador. They were using ground-penetrating radar looking for cracks or stability issues. But then the equipment started acting weird. The radar screen showed an anomaly buried way down, more than 40 feet below the pyramid's foundation. But it wasn't a crack, it was a void, and it wasn't natural. Nature does not build in perfect geometric circles. At first, the team assumed it was a sinkhole or a natural cave system, which are common in the area. But as they started digging, they hit a layer of stone that stopped them cold. The blocks were smooth, too smooth. They were cut with a precision that you just do not see in rough field archaeology. They were bound together by a strange adhesive compound that was harder than modern cement. It took them days just to get through the outer shell, and when they finally cleared the debris, they found it. A sealed doorway. It was a single massive slab of limestone. There were faint engravings on the surface, but they did not look Mayan. They didn't match any known script in the database. Some looked like pre-Olmec shapes, while others seemed entirely alien, full of sharp angles and complex spirals. The team noted their instruments were glitching out again. The slab was giving off weirdly low magnetic readings, almost as if there was metal suspended inside the stone itself. After days of careful drilling, they finally breached the slab. A burst of compressed air hissed out of the crack. It was the sound of an atmosphere that had been trapped for thousands of years finally escaping. They pushed cameras inside. The chamber was circular, about 23 feet across, but the walls were the first thing that made the hair on their arms stand up. They were coated in a black, glass-like substance. It looked like obsidian, but it acted like a sponge for light. It absorbed the beams from their flashlights rather than reflecting them. The air inside was cold, several degrees lower than the jungle heat outside, and it was completely, unnaturally silent. And in the center, sitting on 3 stone pedestals, were the ancient remains of 3 individuals. They were seated cross-legged, surrounded by jade ornaments, polished metallic discs, and crystal fragments. What many researchers overlooked at first was the state of preservation. The site was pristine. There was no decay, no dust, no insect activity. That should be impossible in the tropical humidity of Guatemala. But the individuals themselves were the real mystery. Their skulls were elongated. Now we know the Maya practiced artificial head binding to shape their skulls. It was a status symbol, but this was different. The bone density and symmetry suggested this was not artificial deformation. This was genetic. The volume of the cranial capacity was larger than a standard human skull. But here is the kicker. The team grabbed organic fibers from the chamber to run a carbon dating test. They expected a date of maybe 2,000 years ago, around the height of the Maya power. The results came back at approximately 12,400 years before present. Let that sink in for a second. This chamber and the people inside it were thousands of years older than the Maya civilization. They were older than the Olmecs. They were from a time before history as we know it even began in the Americas. This discovery alone would change the textbooks. It meant civilization was here during the Ice Age. But the thing nobody tells you is what happened when they took the remains back to the lab. They decided to run a full DNA profile. And what they found, what they unleashed, is the dark secret that terrified the researchers. Something was hiding in the blood of these ancient beings. The glowing strand mystery. The initial analysis was standard procedure. The scientists extracted genetic material from the teeth and inner ear bones. The mitochondrial DNA belonged to haplogroup A2, which is common among indigenous peoples of the Americas. That part made sense, but then the deeper sequencing failed. Specific parts of the genome just would not align with any known human data. The computer kept throwing up error messages. They thought it was contamination, maybe from the researchers handling the bones. But the anomaly repeated. It was identical across all three individuals. They found the issue in the non-coding regions of the genome. This is the part scientists used to call junk DNA because they thought it didn't do anything. But in these samples, that junk was organized. They found a sequence, a repeating patterned motif. It was so precise it could not be random. It wasn't a mutation, it was mathematical. When they mapped it out visually, the pattern displayed a recurring ratio that perfectly approximated the Fibonacci progression. It was a code. This was impossible. This was a message hidden inside a strand of DNA from 12,000 years ago. They labeled the anomaly Sequence X473. It was part human, part something else. This is where the story gets truly unsettling. This wasn't just old DNA, it was active. Parallel tests at another university confirmed that these strange DNA strands, sequence X473, emitted faint biophotonic activity. Basically, when they hit it with ultraviolet light, the DNA glowed. The wavelength of the light matched certain bioluminescent marine animals. Why would human remains from a jungle chamber glow? The team compared the sequence against every global genetic database. No match, not to any species, ancient or modern. It was a hybrid. It looked for all the world like it was synthetic, and then they saw the connection. Researchers back at the dig site were enhancing the images of the glyphs carved on the outside of the chamber door, the spiral patterns, the star-like formations. They sent the patterns to the genetics lab. The lab team was stunned. The micro patterns in the DNA, the geometric configurations of the base pairs, perfectly mirrored the spiral glyphs etched into the stone door. This was not a coincidence. This was design. The builders of this chamber 12,000 years ago somehow understood genetic engineering. They had encoded their sacred symbols into the very biology of the people inside. This is where a senior geneticist proposed a hypothesis so wild it was immediately classified. He suggested the sequence wasn't biology at all. It was data storage. The DNA was a biological hard drive. The idea was that this junk DNA was carrying non-biological information. When they translated the anomalous segments into binary code, the data produced repeating numerical constants. These constants corresponded to precise astronomical ratios, specifically the orbital period of Venus relative to Earth. This chamber wasn't a tomb, it was an archive. And the people inside weren't just people, they were the books. They were living libraries carrying the astronomical secrets of the universe in their genes. The isotopic signature of the calcium in their bones was also off. It suggested they had lived in an atmosphere with a slightly higher oxygen content, conditions not seen in that region for over 10,000 years. So who were these people? An unknown branch of humanity? A lost pre-Mayan lineage? The truth, as it turns out, is even stranger. This genetic ghost, this sequence X473, didn't just belong to 3 individuals who perished 12,000 years ago. The geneticists ran one more test, a total long shot. They compared the sequence to modern populations in the region. They didn't expect to find anything, but they got a hit. The sequence wasn't gone, it was just dormant. The ancient bloodline is still alive and watching us today. The breath of the sky. The database lit up with a low-frequency match. It pointed to samples collected decades earlier for totally unrelated research. The samples came from a small cluster of isolated highland communities in the Yucatan Peninsula. This was the modern connection, the link between the impossible past and the living present. Teams were immediately sent back to these highland settlements. You have to picture this. These populations live in difficult terrain, far from major cities and tourist spots. They maintain ancient customs and oral traditions that have survived for centuries. They are tough, resilient people who have kept to themselves. The new DNA test confirmed it. Faint, degraded traces of sequence X473 persisted among a small percentage of the individuals. The implications were staggering. Medically, the sequence seemed to influence cellular behavior in subtle ways. In the lab, cells containing the sequence showed accelerated tissue repair and unusually high memory-related neural activity. These people had, for generations, shown an inexplicably high immunity to certain infections. But the cultural connection was the real bombshell. Anthropologists interviewing the village elders heard strange phrases. The elders spoke of being guardians of the old blood. Their oral histories, passed down for hundreds of generations, warned against intermarriage with outsiders. Not for reasons of prejudice, but as they said, to prevent a loss of balance. They were unknowingly preserving a genetic distinction. They were protecting the sequence. When the researchers showed the elders the enhanced images of the spiral glyphs from the 12,000-year-old chamber, several of them recognized it immediately. They called it the breath of the sky. This wasn't just a story, it was a genetic memory passed down from a time before the Maya. But the mystery of where this DNA came from was only getting deeper. As they looked at broader data, they found microfragments of it everywhere. Tiny trace amounts in South Pacific Islanders, in northern Andean populations, and even in certain Arctic groups. The sequence didn't have a common ancestor. Phylogenetic models could not trace its origin. It didn't evolve. It just appeared. It looked for all the world like an insert, an intentional addition, a piece of code sporadically inserted into human populations all over the globe, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The picture was becoming clear. The DNA, the ancient individuals, the living descendants, they were all part of a single massive system. But what was the other part of the system? The DNA was the software. Where was the hardware? The answer, it turns out, was buried just a few miles away from the first chamber, and it was still active. Something massive was waking up beneath the forest floor. The signal and the receiver. While the geneticists were chasing ghosts in the blood, the remote sensing teams found something else. A second anomaly, much, much bigger. Beneath the jungle canopy, hidden under layers of ancient ash and limestone, was a perfect symmetrical ring. It was massive, measuring roughly 300 feet across. This was no sinkhole, this was a structure. Core samples were extracted. What they found should not exist. The ring was made of alloy materials including titanium, vanadium, and iridium. These are metals that require incredibly high temperatures to process. You need blast furnaces to make this stuff. The surrounding volcanic glass was fused with metallic particles, evidence of exposure to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. No pre-industrial society could do this. This wasn't a temple. This was a piece of advanced technology. But here's the crazy part. The thing was humming. Magnetotelluric readings revealed the ring was emitting low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. They were faint, but they were regular. A stable pulse repeating every 11 minutes like clockwork. The team was baffled. What was this machine? An astronomical instrument, an energy source? The initial readings suggested it wasn't just underground. It went deep, deeper than their equipment could penetrate. This wasn't just a machine, it was a beacon. They decided to map the pulse pattern. They converted the electromagnetic frequency into a numerical ratio, and they nearly fell over. The pulse pattern from the 300-foot metallic ring perfectly matched the mathematical ratio of sequence X473. The machine and the DNA were connected. Let that sink in. A piece of buried, impossible technology was actively communicating with a unique genetic sequence found only in the local guardians of the old blood. They were two parts of the same system resonating at the same frequency. This structure was, in effect, talking to the special DNA. This is when the theories went from lost civilization to something else entirely. What if the machine wasn't talking to the DNA but powering it? Or what if the people were the power source? A living biological battery network designed to keep this ancient machine on standby? Or maybe the most terrifying theory of all, what if the ring wasn't sending a message but an instruction? A command written in electromagnetism telling that special DNA to do something, to change, to activate. The scientists realized they were standing on top of a dormant network that had been waiting for 12 millennia. and they had just poked the bear. The pulse rate began to increase slightly as they excavated. It was reacting to their presence, or perhaps it was reacting to the exposure of the DNA. But where did the builders go? And why leave such a complex system behind? The answer was hidden on a jade tablet found back in the first chamber, and it pointed to the stars. So here's the real question to keep you up at night. If this ancient system is an alarm clock hidden in our blood, what happens when it finally hits zero? Do we really want to know who is on the other end of that signal? If you enjoyed this mystery, hit like and subscribe for more.